This is your daily dose of all things royal.
Good morning, everyone. There it is. Thank you very much to IAPP for inviting me and for the work that so many of you are doing on the front lines of digital privacy. At a time when there is so much devastation and suffering happening in the world, it might seem strange to be speaking about privacy. But I see it differently. I see privacy as a foundational issue, one that underpins trust, safety, and the stability of our societies. And getting this right will have global consequences. Now, my connection to privacy and the lack of it begins in a different place than most, from birth. And you may know that I've spent the last 7 years in litigation against 3 media organizations in the UK over their systemic and unlawful invasions of privacy, as well as the cover-up of it, dating back to the early 2000s. The worst examples of an industry that too often behaves as though it owns people's privacy and feels it gets to decide what constitutes the public interest. And unfortunately, I've come to learn that this exploitation has become normalized. The breaches of privacy have morphed into commercial tactics across industries, notably the tech industry, with innovations like social media platforms and advances in artificial intelligence. As you can perhaps tell, I have nothing to gain from taking on powerful institutions. In many ways, it comes at a personal and reputational cost for me, my wife, and our children. But is it worth it? Absolutely. Because this is about more than one individual. It is about the systems that shape and influence all of our lives. And across my work in business and philanthropy, I've seen how the current model of technology isn't just failing to support progress. It's actively setting it back for communities around the world. Over the last several years, I've had countless conversations with experts like you all, along with parents and young people who have experienced firsthand the loss of privacy while coming of age in our modern, increasingly online world. I've done a deep dive into the tech-fueled world in which my children, all of our children, are growing up in. I've heard harrowing stories of how time spent on the platforms of today's tech giants is leading to grave and irreversible harm. Stories that all but cancelled out any entertainment or other value those technologies were offering. Stories about how the existing so-called solutions calling for bans and blocks and parent toolkits were unrealistic and ineffective, given how interwoven tech has become across every facet of life. Stories about fears that without adequately addressing privacy across social media, we would never be able to reckon with the challenges of the next technological chapter, artificial intelligence. Simultaneously, I'm seeing constant headlines about state-sponsored surveillance, doxing of election workers and civil rights activists, and massive privacy breaches featuring social security numbers and sensitive health information. The more I learned, the more I felt my own experience with having my privacy owned was just one small example of an extraction problem that we can miss its gravity if we aren't forced to stare at it. But stare at it, we must. The challenge ahead of us all is significant and worthy of our attention. For anyone outside of this room thinking it won't affect them, think again. The good news, we are confronting this challenge and we are stronger together. This room of 4,000 people is evidence of that. This room of people with the power to prioritize privacy. You, collectively, can rewire our entire system. The fact that humans are the architects of this technology means that humans are in the position to design a better future and a world where the right to privacy is not just an ideal, but the norm. So let's take a step back to focus on how we got here. The uncomfortable reality is that many of the privacy-related harms we're now grappling with today are not the result of failure, but the result of success. Systems optimized for extraction are doing exactly what they were designed to do. And this is no longer a debate, no longer opinion, it is fact. So what has failed isn't the technology, but the alignment between power, incentives, and responsibility. Because power, especially at this scale, demands responsibility. And where responsibility is absent, harm becomes predictable and inevitable. Which means the challenge in front of us is not simply better compliance, but better alignment between business models and human outcomes. And to get to that alignment, we have to peel back another layer, because business models don't just appear, just like technology doesn't just come to be. These systems didn't emerge on their own. They were designed. And the outcomes we're seeing, good and bad, are a direct result of the choices built into them. But that's not what we're told most of the time. We're told, by those that are incentivized to tell us so, that technology needs room to breathe, that innovation can't have guardrails, or else it will be held back from its potential. But history shows the opposite. The most transformative industries, aviation, medicine, finance, did not succeed in the absence of safeguards. They succeeded because trust was engineered into the system. Safety didn't limit innovation, it made it scalable. And we've regulated aspects of data use, but we haven't changed the fundamental reality. Participation in the digital world still requires surrendering control over your personal information. And when access depends on agreement, and agreement isn't negotiable, consent becomes a formality, not a safeguard. And even where laws exist, systems are often designed around the edges, perhaps complying with the letter while bypassing the intent. A regulation without closing those gaps risks legitimizing the very dynamics it was meant to correct. So why should some humans, especially humans with endless resources, be allowed to pass on answering hard questions when their profit is powered by the very humans they refuse to protect? Why should they receive privacy protections while victims of their actions and decisions are exploited, blamed, and harmed? From the outside looking in, I can understand that some questions around privacy are incredibly complex. Questions like, given the sheer amount of personal identifying information of children shared on social media without their consent, how can they easily reclaim their privacy before it is used to train LLMs, or worse, used to fulfill the darkest motives? How did we travel so far down the path of the custom experience that we ended up surveilling children and adults in nearly every aspect of their lives? And in a world increasingly shaped by artificial intelligence, where technology will enhance our efficiency and eventually reshape how we live entirely, will personal privacy still be considered worthy of protection? And how do we keep profit-seeking companies from using the banner of privacy to refuse basic transparency about their back-end practices and what they know about how their technology affects users? These are daunting but necessary questions. And it is a relief that there are professionals across the world dedicating their careers to answering them, many of whom are in this room today. But it is also a false notion that every question about privacy is complicated. I refuse to accept that. Some questions have simple answers. Some questions should not even have to be asked. Like, should a parent have to worry about their child's data being sold to a predator? Should a person's voice or face or innermost thoughts be irrefutably their own? Should a young girl have to worry that the man across the room is secretly recording and undressing her using AI through the lens of a pair of smart glasses? Should a government or corporate giant be able to exploit personal privacy to compromise people's personal safety or sanity? Should powerful people have more privacy rights than the people who give them that power? The answer to these questions is simply no. So, what about these? Should people feel safe in their own homes with their own devices? Is the right to privacy inseparable from a person's ability to exercise free will over their own life? Should we have agency over our own lives? The answer to these questions is simply yes. And yet none of this is playing out simply. Let's not let anyone who has an interest in keeping it complex allow us to forget those simple questions with simple answers. Too often, companies want to lean on downstream complexities to avoid upstream accountability. And if you look at the terms that govern many of today's platforms, the imbalance becomes even clearer. Users are asked to grant broad, often irrevocable rights over their data and content. Systems infer who we are, not just what we share, but from how we behave. And the rules themselves can change at any time, with continued use treated as approval and acceptance. Companies conflate repeated use with trust of the platform itself. And at that point, we have to ask, is this consent, or is it structural surrender? Yesterday, we heard from one of the major companies on this stage say that in the age of AI, we will need to go toward privacy by experimentation, or privacy by innovation. Slick slogans with a sinister undertone, sort of like being in the good place. What about privacy by design? Safety by design has been the call to action of the parents and young people we work with. You would think it would be exactly what we all want to get to. But what's getting in the way? The loss of extra zeros at the end of the quarter? Just last week, 2 historic and precedent-setting accountability lawsuits were decided and won against major tech companies, Meta and YouTube. And about bloody time. A jury confirmed what parents have felt and experts have said all along. The systems driving our social media platforms have been built to exploit, not protect. And the people at the heart of it have always known it. Finally, some truth and accountability has arrived. My wife and I had the opportunity to spend time with many of the parents in the Los Angeles case as it proceeded in the courtroom each day. Families that we've come to know over the years while learning more about how technology has stolen their kids' lives. Every one of those families, and more like them, has experienced irreparable harm because of the way technology intersected with their child's life. The way technology followed their children's behavior so closely that platforms algorithmically targeted them with the very dangers they were most susceptible to, leading to eating disorders, drug overdoses, bullying, dangerous viral challenges, and in many cases, suicide. Some parents have had to wait more than 5 years to gain access to their child's phone and apps because of the platform's own privacy rules. Parents left searching for answers, blaming themselves until they eventually discovered the harmful content that social media apps were pushing to their sons and daughters at a time when they were most vulnerable, leading to their death. We're told it's a lack of discipline, that it's a parenting failure or a mental health problem, that users should simply opt out. But that framing, again, intentionally shifts responsibility away from the systems designed to capture and hold our attention in the first place. Their stories are impossible to ignore, and they will almost certainly appear in history books one day. But more questions hang over these stories. Will they actually inspire change? Will companies and governments that are currently pushing to build technology that extracts the maximum possible value from our lives decide on their own that enough is enough? Or will meaningful change only happen if we choose to demand it? An actual choice that rightfully rests with us. This room knows the answer. We cannot wait for behavior to magically change when incentives are structured around avoiding accountability and maximizing profit. And the system itself is designed to keep people addicted. When powerful people continually show their desire to turn our real world into a social media world, a world where anonymity is used to harm, a world without laws or protection, without consequence, without decency. A world without truth and reality becomes a world of chaos and division. And we have to rewrite the script. We have to be strategic. Put rules in place. Trojan horse in protection if necessary. We have to build systems of governance that actually protect people. And we have to build a culture that demands real, meaningful privacy. Because the truth is that it should not take horrific stories about children taking their own lives for us to care about how our information is used. All of us have experienced some version of the same dynamic. We open an app intending to spend 5 minutes. 40 minutes later, we're still there, watching content we didn't ask for, wondering why we couldn't just close the screen. And we blame ourselves. We say we lack discipline. But the reality is that we've built systems that begin with engagement and then scale through increasingly precise behavioral prediction and monetization. There is an entire industry worth hundreds of billions of dollars dedicated to keeping us exactly where we are, studying us, predicting us, nudging us towards behaviors that serve someone else's outcome. And increasingly, these systems influence not just what we see, but how we think, feel, and engage with the world, with little transparency into how deliberately those outcomes are engineered and in whose interests they operate. This is not freedom. This is not normal, and this is not okay. Trust is part of what allowed the digital space to scale in the first place. But that trust has been broken. Not suddenly, but steadily, as people realize these systems don't operate the way that they were promised. And still, we continue, because opting out is no longer realistic. The system no longer relies on trust to function. Yet we rely on it for connection. That should concern all of us. So the question isn't whether trust is broken, it's whether we're willing to rebuild it for everyone's sake, and what that will take. There is also something important about this moment. We're not just living through another phase of technological change. We are standing at the beginning of the next world-shaping shift. Artificial intelligence will transform nearly every part of our lives. And that transformation gives us something rare, a chance to do things differently. For the last 20 years, we've built digital systems first and governed them later. AI gives us a rare opportunity to reverse that sequence, to embed accountability, privacy, and safety into the architecture from the start, not retrofit it after harm has already occurred. We will not get many chances to correct course. Having this conference here in Washington, D.C. is fitting. As a Brit living in the United States, I've been struck by the global reach of American tech. The standards set here increasingly define the digital environment everywhere, even in countries trying to protect their own citizens and their own democracies. And when that influence scales faster than safeguards, the impact is felt far beyond US borders. We can choose data sovereignty instead of data surveillance. We can choose innovation that benefits everyone, not just a handful of companies creating consolidated wealth. We can invest in human-centered technology led by human-centered leadership. More EQ, more leadership, moral leadership that our world so desperately needs, and an industry that we can actually be proud of. These choices and changes require breaking out of groupthink and rejecting a story that we have been told over and over again. We've somewhat regulated data collection, but we have not yet governed the systems that act on that data. It requires anticipating the arguments we're about to hear about advances in technology and AI and any other new product rolling out on the market, and being ready to respond, reject, and demand a different reality. So, as you go about your time together this week, ask yourselves not whether privacy will matter in the age of AI, but whether we will build systems where it is impossible to ignore. And thank you for being the brave leaders that we all need.
Such a fraud.